History 1. Back in October of 2016, something happened that I'll never forget. For a bit of background, I was living in Fargo, a city that always felt too small for me. I was a 30-year-old guy, but in this story I was just 22, still staying with my folks and my two brothers, Danny and Mike. We all needed a break from the constant nagging at home, so we decided to plan a little getaway. We found a nice-looking Airbnb about 2 hours out of town, nestled in a forest. It was spacious, affordable, and seemed like the perfect spot for a weekend escape. We packed up our bags, hopped in my old truck, and headed out. The drive was smooth, and when we arrived, the host greeted us warmly, handed over the keys, and left us to settle in. The weather was just right, and the view of the autumn leaves, all golden and orange, was breathtaking. On our first night, we decided to explore the area, taking a long walk through the forest. We chatted about life, made jokes, and just enjoyed the tranquility. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest grew darker and more foreboding. Now, I don't know about Danny and Mike, but I've always been a bit jumpy in the dark. The idea of being alone in a forest at night? No thanks. Guys, I said, maybe we should head back to the rental. It's getting pretty creepy out here. They agreed and we started back. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a growl. It was strange, almost like a mix between a human and an animal. "What the hell was that?" Danny asked. "I don't know, but I don't want to find out," I replied. Suddenly, we heard something rushing toward us. "I hear something heading our way. Let's get out of here, quick," I yelled. Looking back, I saw a figure emerging from the trees. It looked like a man but was way too tall, with oddly shaped shoulders that arched unnaturally. We sprinted back to the Airbnb and slammed the door shut, locking it behind us. But our ordeal wasn't over. Around 1 a.m., after we'd calmed down a bit, I still couldn't shake the image of that figure from my mind. Was it a man in a costume? Part of some weird cult? Was our host in on it? I double-checked all the locks, trying to ease my paranoia. Eventually, I crawled into bed but couldn't sleep. Out of curiosity, I peeked out the window and saw a black dog standing under the dim driveway lamp. At first, it seemed normal, but the longer I looked, the more unnerved I became. The dog was staring right at me, completely still. Then, unbelievably, its eyes began to glow red. It stood up on its hind legs, moving almost like a kangaroo before transforming into a humanoid shape with long, sharp nails. I freaked out, slamming the blinds shut. My brothers rushed in, alarmed by my screams. "Josh, what's wrong with you?" Mike asked. "I saw something in the driveway," I stammered. "It was a dog, but then it turned into, I don't know, something else." They didn't believe me until they heard the growl we'd heard earlier, this time right outside the front door. Something started pounding on the door, over and over. We were all terrified, searching for anything we could use as a weapon. Thankfully, the door held. After a tense silence, we stayed up the rest of the night, too scared to sleep. The next morning, we couldn't get out of there fast enough. As we drove away, I saw that same eerie dog, its eyes following us until we were out of sight. Our Airbnb host, of course, thought we were making it all up and refused to give us a refund. But honestly, I didn't care. I was just grateful we made it out of there alive. History 2. When I was in my early 20s, I lived in Milwaukee, and I wasn't making much money. I found an apartment that seemed too good to be true. The top floor was a duplex with 6 rooms for just $750. The agent showing me the apartment emphasized that the landlords were very religious. That didn't bother me, even if it did sound a bit peculiar. The landlords were an elderly couple living downstairs. At first, they seemed friendly, smiling at me when they saw me in the yard. But things changed when they noticed my girlfriend visiting. One day, I was in my office writing when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find the old lady from downstairs. Before I could say anything, she asked me if I had ever had an abortion. I was shocked and slammed the door in her face. This was a huge mistake. The layout of the house was odd, with a door at the bottom of a flight of stairs that was always locked. I learned the hard way that it led directly into my landlord's living room. One day, I was in the kitchen cooking while my girlfriend was at work. I heard what sounded like the click of a door, I walked into the hallway and looked around but saw no one. I peeked into all the rooms. Nobody was there. Then I looked down the staircase and saw the neighbor lady standing there staring at me. I screamed, and she flinched, stepping back into her apartment and slamming the door shut. After that incident, I avoided the house as much as possible. I would come back to find things moved around, windows shut, the shower dripping, and my towel damp. I couldn't lock that downstairs door since it was technically part of their house, and they were the only ones with the key. The knocking became more frequent, 3 or 4 times a day. My girlfriend and I propped up an old mattress so we wouldn't have to hear it while we slept. The second to last straw was when I opened the door for work and found the stairs were gone. I couldn't physically leave the house. The stairs had been dismantled and were sitting on their porch. I called them repeatedly, but they didn't answer. Finally, their son came out and explained they were doing some remodeling. He told me I had to cut through their apartment downstairs. I descended the staircase, opened the door, and saw them both sitting at their filthy kitchen table, staring at me. The phone was ringing in its cradle, but they kept staring with blank looks on their faces. I crossed their kitchen and left out the back door. A few days later, I came home from work and found the bathroom floor flooded, like someone had left the faucet on. The old woman, seeing I had come home, came up the stairs and knocked, screaming that I had flooded the bathroom and that her son would have to fix it. Exhausted, I just agreed. Her son came by a few hours later, completely drunk. I opened the door and told him I needed an hour. He then picked something up and swung it at me. It was a massive wrench. I ducked out of the way and he stumbled over. I pushed past him, ran down the newly repaired stairs, and called the police. They came by and took down the complaint. But since there was no physical contact, they couldn't do much. I later discovered this old couple had a daughter on the police force. In the middle of the night, my girlfriend, several of her friends, and I packed all our stuff into a Chevy Astro. We lived in hotels and out of our vehicles for a month until we found a new place. That old couple never attempted to contact us again. History 3. This past New Year was my 4th anniversary with my girlfriend. We usually don't do much, but this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. We found a cozy cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub and were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. You had to drive down a small private road that ended in a roundabout. Off this roundabout was a long uphill driveway leading to our cabin. When we arrived, it was snowy and scenic. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, and you had to enter through some stairs in the back. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all the information outlined. The book mentioned that during the winter season, it wasn't unusual for their contracted snowplow to show up and clear off the driveway. That sounded fine to me. We unpacked and realized there was no cell service, but there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire, playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed. We planned to spend the next day in town, and I booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed for dinner. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne and hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature dropped, and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of white. We drove down the private road and reached the driveway. It was at that point my girlfriend stopped the car and asked if I had noticed the new tire tracks on the ground. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard these new tire tracks, but there they were. We remembered that the snow plowers might have stopped by, but the issue was that we saw these tire tracks because of the snow. And who plows in the dark? We also knew that once we were at the cabin, there would be no cell service, so we figured we would head back into town and message our Airbnb hosts to ask if they or one of their friends had stopped by the cabin. We waited for a while in town for a reply but never heard back. We could have called, but it was past 10 o'clock and we didn't want to be discourteous. We figured we had blown the whole thing out of proportion and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I was big into true crime and horror movies and was probably just psyching myself out. My girlfriend drove us back, and this time we actually drove up the driveway towards the top of the hill. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints in the snow. We backed down the driveway, and took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had driven up the driveway, reversed down, parked, then got out of their car and walked onto the property. This property was quite large, with tons of trees and bushes, and we knew these footprints could go anywhere. The moment we saw them, we decided to call the police. We figured it was better to be safe than sorry, and we would just have an officer go onto the property with us to check everything out. We drove back down the driveway until we got service again, then called the police, explained the situation, and waited for their arrival. A police officer showed up, and we followed him onto the property. The officer scanned the property and determined there was no one there. Obviously, we were a bit shaken up and kind of embarrassed. We thanked him as he left. Needless to say, we no longer wanted to get into the hot tub and look out into the dark forest. Instead, we locked ourselves inside and watched a movie without any champagne. We were both tired from the day and passed out pretty quickly. At 3 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with all the lights and TV on. As my girlfriend went to brush her teeth, we heard a noise that only lasted a few seconds. We both looked at each other and froze. It was the garage door. There were very few reasons someone would need to open a garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 o'clock in the morning. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew we were here and could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and dialed 911. As I sat on the phone talking to the operator, we heard a bang on the balcony as if someone threw something onto it. I was losing my mind when the operator told me the police were on their way. We sat crouched in the cabin, hoping the police would show up in time. Suddenly, we saw the police lights in the driveway. They exited their cars and began searching the property. Soon, we heard them knocking at the door. There were 2 policemen, one in front of us and the other a bit behind, still looking around the yard. I immediately noticed that the officer in the back was the one who had come out on the first call. They told us that not only was the garage door shut, but it was locked again, and there were no signs of anyone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the officer said the road conditions were too dangerous at that time. I looked at the officer who had come out to the property twice and felt like I had deeply disappointed him. We went back inside, locked all the doors, and then went to bed. The next day, we were leaving. We didn't feel right in the cabin anymore, and I just wanted to get out of there. As we packed, we heard the same noise. It was the heater, a heater that sounded just like a garage door opening. My girlfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows." As for the banging on the balcony, it was just a perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I think back on this story and feel embarrassed, but I'm also incredibly grateful. For some reason, we were wrong about the garage door opening, and maybe I was being a bit too paranoid. But the tire tracks and footprints we saw were real. For all we know, there could have been somebody out there watching us.